My name is Scott Wasserman, and it's my honor and privilege to be the president of the Bell Policy Center. 20 years ago, three visionary women, Merle Chambers, Linda Shoemaker, and Jean Dubofsky, each trailblazers in their own right, came up with a powerful vision that there should be a progressive research and advocacy organization in Colorado whose sole mission was to make economic life for every Coloradan better, regardless of the circumstance they were born into. And over the past 2 decades, that vision has come to life through the hard work of staff, policymakers, and elected officials, and through the work of thousands of supporters and activists. This organization has become a reliable agent for economic change in Colorado. With the generous support of our sponsors, who are listed here on the screen, we've been able to commemorate 2 decades of research and advocacy with an album that documents the work that the Bell has done over the years. It also honors the men and women who rose to the occasion to chair our board. It's actually a fantastic memento that we'll be working to put online and make available for those who would like their own hard copy. And so over the course of tonight, you're going to see a few pages of that during our transitions. I can't thank Linda Shoemaker, Jean Dubofsky, Penfield Tate, Scott Martinez, Kelly Nordini, and Kathleen Beatty enough for their leadership over the years. Together with my predecessor, Wade Buchanan, each of them faced different challenges and opportunities, and each of them stood up to be visible and accountable for the work that we do. As I page through this book, I not only see their stories, but I see the hallmarks of an organization that has been constantly developing, adapting, and evolving its understanding of how our economy works and our theory of change for how to make it better. Together, we've raised the minimum wage, we've improved public investment, we've protected lenders, we've increased access to higher education, and we've reduced barriers into the workforce. And those are just a few of our accomplishments. We've also become a dependable resource for voters and community leaders on the most important issues facing our state. Proud as we are of these accomplishments, we know that we face huge challenges ahead. Economic inequality is greater than it's ever been in America since World War II. We're failing to invest in tools and structures that all of our research clearly shows would close that gap. And we also face huge structural dilemmas as we grapple with changing demographics, technologies, and politics. So that's why I'm excited that tonight our program is going to feature one of our closest partners, Lauren Casteel, the CEO of the Women's Foundation of Colorado, interviewing our United States Senator, Michael Bennet. In that conversation, I suspect we'll hear quite a bit about the dilemmas and priorities that confront our state and nation. After that interview, we are lucky to have Max Potter, who is a locally based writer and also a member of the Bell Policy Board, share some of his highlights from interviewing our 6 board chairs. And I'm really excited to hear his reflections on the journey that the Bell has taken. Finally, our current board chair, Kathleen Beatty, who's also one of our honorees, will close us out. So before I hand things over to Lauren, I just want to be sure to recognize a few folks. First of all, I want to recognize our board. Lauren Arnold, Kathleen Beatty, Kelly Nordini, Václav Pathy, Max Potter, Ray Rivera, Noel Ginsberg, James Iacino, Jace Woodrum, Letty Garcia-Eckstein, and Angela Cobayan. They are all fantastic board members and community leaders, and I'm so appreciative of their support for our work. And then finally, I want to add my gratitude not only for the current staff, who you can see here in the slide next to me, but all of those that came before them. Each one of the staff members for the Bell pours their heart into this work, and they've contributed endlessly to the stellar reputation for credibility and innovation that we are known for. So I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight and for your generous support for this organization over the years. And so I am now going to hand it over to Lauren Casteel, who will have a conversation with Senator Michael Bennet.
Hello, Michael. I should announce to everyone that you have given me permission that I don't have to hang out with calling you Senator throughout the course of this conversation, because that is not natural to me. But first and foremost, I want to say thank you to all of you who are joining us here this evening. It's a wonderful opportunity for me to support the Bell Policy Center. As was mentioned earlier, they are very strong partners of the Women's Foundation, And as I heard the list of the names of the founders of Bell Policy Center, certainly all of them are also very dear friends of the Women's Foundation of Colorado. For those of you who don't know, public policy is a key component of our work. When we think of how we have impact, grant making is certainly essential, and Bell Policy Center is one of our grantee partners. But beyond that, it's also research and policy and advocacy. So in that context, I'm really honored, Senator Bennet, I should be formal for a moment, to have you joining us here today for what we have agreed, for those of you who are joining us, is going to be a more spontaneous conversation, wandering around issues that have already been acknowledged in some of your small rooms and certainly in the introduction, around economics, two-generation, the intersections of race and gender and class, the larger national perspective, but more importantly, also Colorado. You are our longest standing Colorado senator, and therefore your perspective for Colorado specifically is important. And then lastly, because I won't have this opportunity, happy anniversary to the Bell, and congratulations to my dear friend Kathleen Beatty. Kathleen and I first met on the board of the Women's Foundation of Colorado, and I won't tell you what decade that was in. I won't even say what year, which decade that happened to have been. So, Michael, let's talk first and foremost, let's bring this into the context of the Bell. When you think about organizations such as the Bell Policy or others here in Colorado or the Women's Foundation that work in advocacy, that work in developing research, this past year, Bell, or in the past couple of years, has done research on the middle class, recently released a report that we were very pleased to support on the future of work and the impact of COVID on women. To what degree do those matter in the actual framing, those kinds of research and policy community efforts that go on behind the scenes? What influence and impact do they really have?
Thank you, Lauren. Let me first say thank you to everybody for having me tonight. It's an amazing honor for me, and this is my DC house, so you can see the glamorous life, but I'm just grateful to be able to celebrate this with you. I see Wade Buchanan on the screen, and he and I mean, the most time that I've actually spent with Bell was when Wade was running it back when I was working for John Hickenlooper. I don't know whatever happened to Hickenlooper. If you see him, let him know I said hello. But I just am so grateful for the work that Bell does and for the conversation, Lauren, we're going to be able to have tonight. I actually will say this, and it won't surprise you that I would say this. I think the work you do is more important today than it's ever been, because our democracy, and we'll talk about this tonight, is under enormous stress. It's obviously being stress tested every single day right now. But I view Donald Trump really as a symptom of our issues, not as the cause of most of our issues. And part of in a democracy, figuring out how to create the opportunity for people to actually contend with the facts as they really are, in order to make public policy, rather than being guided by whatever Twitter happens to think. And now I'm not talking about the president, I'm talking about my daily life. Whatever Twitter happens to think is the priority today is really important. This exercise in self-government cannot succeed on many dimensions, or will only succeed on many different dimensions, but it can't succeed without the facts. And that's where Bell Policy Center starts, is by developing a set of facts of what is actually happening, and then the advocacy around it, so that we can put the right policies in place. I think a lot about what's his name? The guy, it'll come to me, or somebody on this call will know, the Matthew Desmond's book, Evicted. If you haven't read it, you should read it. You won the Pulitzer Prize. That book is an amazing piece of reporting about about housing policy in this country, and he went to Milwaukee in that case to do the reporting. And what he discovered was a lot of well-intentioned policy from Washington, D.C. doesn't make any sense by the time it gets to Milwaukee. I think that's true of a lot of policy. In the wake of Dodd-Frank, a bill that I supported, FICO scores, went up, or, people with lower FICO scores had a harder time buying houses. Was that the intention of what we were trying to do? No. And so I think where Bell comes in is to inform our democracy, to do the work that we need to actually be successful. And I say we need it now more than ever because you are competing now with misinformation, disinformation, and from people at home, but also from, I hate to say it, but it's true, foreign powers overseas who seek to divide us through all the fault lines in our society. So, you and the other people that do the kind of work that you do in a nonpartisan way that is about elucidating the truth and then advocating for a fairer society in Colorado and across the country has never been more important.
Well, that's wonderful to hear because as we like to say at the Women's Foundation, our grant making connects us to what the work that's on the ground, to real people's lives, our research, that data, each of those numbers similarly represents a person. So we go from action to traction in public policy. As you think about economic mobility in these times, you and I had a moment speaking of data just before we joined the larger group, where we were both talking about how suddenly people are saying the veil has been ripped off of racial inequality and inequity, gender inequality and inequity, that they're seeing the variances between urban and rural communities. What was your first response when I told you I wanted to talk about the data that suddenly, the research that people are suddenly acknowledging about these circumstances?
My first response was you shouldn't have needed a pandemic to see that, and every time I read an opinion piece in one of the national newspapers that talks about how all of this has been revealed, all I can think of is you must never have had the opportunity to sit in a classroom in a high poverty neighborhood, or then go sit in a classroom in a wealthy neighborhood in this country, because in 10 seconds you'd be able to figure out the kind of gaps that we're talking about in this country. But the whole country is shot through with it. I mean, and the good news is that I think we can't turn away from it now because when you see the United States, first of all, fail to respond to a pandemic, if there's ever a reason for us to be one nation under God, and I actually think there are a lot of reasons for us to be that, but if there were ever a reason, it's to respond to a global pandemic. My daughter always gets mad at me when I say global. When it's a pandemic, you don't have to say it's global, a pandemic. And in fact, it is impossible not to see the different health outcomes based on people's race, based on income, based on their lack of access to primary care versus people that have access to primary care. I've not had a single conversation with teachers or principals or parents about education since March that didn't end in tears because people know how unfair this is to kids, how far behind kids that were falling behind are going to fall behind because we don't have broadband in our state for rural communities. And by the way, one last point I'd make, Lauren, if you asked me before the pandemic, what's the biggest change from when you were school superintendent till today in education, I would have said mental health. That is to say, teachers would say mental health is a huge issue in a way that they didn't 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Now with the pandemic, that's even more true. The last point I'll make is on the racial stuff. Lauren, I spent my college years studying the historiography of Reconstruction. That's what I spent my time studying. And if you had told me that the wealth gap and the income gap would be wider in 2020 between black families and white families than it was in 1987, I would have said that's impossible. I graduated from college 19 years after Dr. King was assassinated. I would have said that's impossible. And in his latest book, I'm trying to remember his name, the Princeton professor who's head of the African American Studies Department at Princeton.
Cornell?
Yeah, who's just written this wonderful book about James Baldwin. If you guys have the chance to read it, it's really, really good. One of the things he writes in that book is take a drive on any place called Martin Luther King Boulevard in this country, and you'll have a sense of how much progress we've made or how little the progress is that we've made. And he's right about that. And that's because we've never, ever come face to face with a legacy a straight line that you can draw from slavery to Jim Crow to the redlining of our housing and banking sectors to the mass incarceration that we have to the deep, deep, deep inequities that we have in our K-12 school systems today.
Well, as you talk about some policy, when you talk about that divide, and it's true, I mean, in Denver, I don't live that far from MLK Boulevard, that for many years was in fact the divide, and it moved, it was Montview Park Hill took a stand on that, but you had, it went from Montview to 23rd to 26th, but MLK, Chris Rock once made a movie about that. But from a policy perspective, when you talk about the wealth gap, and people are often shocked when I mention this, and I don't expect that you will be, but the GI Bill was one of the most significant causes for the wealth gap within this country. And so as we talk about today, recreating, co-creating, reimagining a new economic structure, a new economic future for all Americans, for all people within this country. What is your vision, and what have you learned either from the past, from other countries, from your experience, from stories that you have heard today that make you think that there are avenues or opportunities that are not only right, but smart and feasible?
Yeah. So first of all, on the point about the GI Bill, you're right, and that's exactly what we can say about federal housing policy in this country. And Ta-Nehisi Coates has written better on that than anybody else. It's exactly what the New Deal was, unfortunately, a compact between white Democratic liberals and Southern white segregationists. And the New Deal itself, the sort of the DNA of what we think of as progressive policy in this country, was a massive effort that discriminated against African American people. So less of that, I would say, first of all, and making sure that everybody's actually benefiting. If I had to sum up, Lauren, the last 10 or 11 years of town halls, I cannot believe I've been in this job that long in Colorado, and I've done many in every single part of the state over and over and over again. It's really easy to summarize, and keep in mind, we have one of the most dynamic economies in America. And if I had to summarize it, it's people coming and saying, Michael, we are working really hard, but we cannot afford some combination of housing, healthcare, higher education, or early childhood education. In other words, we can't afford a middle-class life no matter how hard we work, and we feel like our kids are going to be worse off than we are, and we can't save, and we're not going to be able to leave them anything. If I think about the parents in DPS, when I worked there, a lot of them would say, they'd come and they'd say, we're killing ourselves. And they are, because a lot of them are working 2 or 3 jobs. And we're killing ourselves. And no matter what we do, we can't get our kids out of poverty. And so that's a reflection on an economy that Bell has studied as well as anybody in the country has studied, that for 50 years has worked well for the top 10% of Americans, but for the bottom 90%, think about that, the bottom 90%, that's almost all of America, for the last 50 years hasn't had a pay raise. And so what I believe we should do is substantively and politically create an agenda that's actually going to make a material economic difference in the lives of people so they can see a benefit. Right now, there's deep cynicism and mistrust about government. And how could you blame people? We just fought 2 wars in the Middle East that lasted for 20 years that didn't accomplish what we said we were going to accomplish. We've spent $5 trillion fighting those wars. A better way of saying it is we borrowed $5 trillion from the Chinese to fight those wars, 5.6. We borrowed $5 trillion, another $5 trillion from the Chinese to give tax cuts that went to the wealthiest people in America when we've had the worst income inequality that we've had since 1928. None of it makes any sense.
So if we're not going to try to recover, which seems to, when I hear the word recover, that to me sounds like more of the same. We're going to go back. We're going to come out of being COVID fine to back to where we were. Tell me that, what will in your hope, what are you working toward in very concrete terms? Short term and long term.
One very concrete example that's my favorite example, which is, and I've talked to the Bell staff about this over the years, the American Family Act, which is a bill that I wrote. Sherrod Brown is the co-sponsor. It would dramatically increase the child tax credit and pay it out on a monthly basis, $300 a month per kid per month. And for kids under the age of 6, $250 a month per kid over the age of 6. Columbia University has researched this. They say that if we pass this in 1 year, we'd cut childhood poverty in America by 40%. We'd cut Black kids' poverty in America by 50%, Latino kid poverty in America by 50%. Wouldn't add a single federal bureaucrat to the federal rolls. All it is a tax change. So I would reverse what President Trump did on the tax cut for the wealthiest, and I would put that into the child tax credit. I would ramp up and increase the earned income tax credit for childless people in this country. At the same time we were doing that, that would be a massive benefit to everybody in America and result in a huge boon to the economy. By the way, we've seen an example of what happens when people actually are able to withstand dislocation because government acts in their behalf, or are exercising self-government acts in their behalf. With what we did on unemployment in this crisis that we're in right now, we kept 12 million Americans out of poverty because we were able to act on unemployment. That meant $4 billion to Colorado's economy that wouldn't have otherwise been here. I'll give you one other example, Lauren, and then I know I'm going on too long. Here's another one. Paid family leave. You guys worked on that. Colorado passed that. We passed paid family leave. And you know what? I don't have the full math on this yet. I just asked for some of it tonight. There are counties in Colorado, I have in mind Moffat County, where the margin for paid family leave was actually higher than Donald Trump's margin. So if you're thinking to yourself, are we in a hopelessly divided country where we can't possibly be imaginative enough to come up with ideas that can bring the American people together? Imagine a world where something almost everybody on this call wants is supported by more people in Moffat County than Donald Trump. That, to me, that creates real optimism about the choices that we can make if we make choices that actually will make a difference in people's lives, like the American Family Act, like paid family leave, like, raising the minimum wage in a way that makes sense, creating universal health care in this country in a way that makes sense to people. These are all things we could do.
I'm looking at the people who are on this call today, and I could just go right down the line and say hello to so many that I know and respect. I know, it's just, when you mentioned Wade, I thought, oh, I'm going to look. And I've been really struck by that. But we also have on this audience itself, a certain elite echelon of people who have access to information, to data. What is it that we as a larger public, and we all know vote, okay, is one essential thing, but how can people advocate for themselves? When you talked about hope, two of the elements of hope are that one has a sense of personal agency, and the other one is that they have a plan. When you're talking about the kind of poverty that people are living in, what is it that the public can do to have agency to help develop the plans that are necessary? How do we begin as members of this society?
I think it begins with understanding that I think it begins with understanding that part of being human is having concern for your fellow humans, and that that it's not okay that kids in our society, including kids in Denver, Colorado, are consigned to a certain set of outcomes because of the circumstances of their birth. Like, it's not, you know, it is not okay that certainly not okay that our education system today, or put it another way, the way we educate people in our country, think about the absence of early childhood, the lack of quality of K-12, barriers to access for higher ed. You take all that together, and I am not overstating this. Our education system today is reinforcing the income inequality we have in this country rather than liberating people from their economic circumstances, because the best predictor of the quality of your education and how far you're going to go is your parents' income, to the point of ruthlessness. So the idea that somehow if only you just would get a decent education, everything's going to be okay. In this country, we have forestalled that. We have precluded that for the moment from people. So I think part of it is grappling with the deep unfairness of that, and you know, the how much better off we would be if we all did John Rawls' thought experiment behind the veil, imagining what a just society would look like, not knowing what our position in the society was going to be. Or another way I think about that is treating America's children like they're our children instead of treating them like they're someone else's children. But I think the second piece to me is much more important than what I just said, and it's the part I don't think we understand. This is not an act of charity that I'm talking about. The survival of our democracy depends on us having economic mobility. The survival of our pluralistic society depends on other people that are different from us having agency and the ability to have their voices heard in the democracy. If they don't, we are weakened as a democracy. And that's how we burnish the ideas. This is not some, you know, lame call for inclusion, or this is the point of living in a democratic republic. The idea at the beginning, and obviously hugely fraught because of slavery and other kinds of things, but the idea at the beginning was there was not going to be a king or a tyrant to tell us what to think. And that out of not our lazy consensus or lazy compromise, but out of our disagreements, out of contending with other people's points of view and opinions and perspectives, that we would create more durable and more imaginative solutions than any king or tyrant could come up with on their own. And that's what's lost right now in the United States Senate. It doesn't exist. I see it every day in Colorado, every day at the local level, where people are grappling with these issues, where they can't hide from their constituents. And they're doing it because they know their society, that town, is going to rise or fall together. And that's just as true for us as a country. And the founders were very skeptical that we could ever do this at the scale of the 13 colonies. We now are really being tested with 330 million people. But I think until we see the benefits to our democracy and to our way of life and to our society as being completely aligned with the agency that other people are able to achieve through economic mobility, our whole society is going to be at risk, and we all need to care about that.
You know, it's interesting, back to the veil, and I think we have about 3 minutes left at most.
Sorry about that.
No. One of the things that really struck me was that you paused for a moment and you went deeper inside of yourself in your response to that answer. That was an emotive answer. That was not a political answer. And we could see that occur for you. So thank you for that. It's not about the time. But again, as we think about the state of Colorado, we have all heard Navajo Nation that doesn't have running water or sanitation. Again, people shocked by that. In the state of Colorado, we have profoundly rural towns. We have Ute Mountain Reservation. We have urban. What is it that those who have the agency, who are on this call here today, what is it that we can do? We've talked about citizenry and providing access for those voices and in the line of democracy. What is your final charge to these folks who may be your, who are friends or colleagues, but certainly who have agency and access? What do you want us to do?
I guess what I would say is we have no right to give up. We have no right to give up. I've heard a lot of people during this election say to me, there's no point in voting because that's all the same, nothing ever happens. Or we voted before and nothing ever changes. And we have no right to think about it that way. And we have no right to think about it that way if John Lewis did, what John Lewis did and what John Lewis told us we needed to do. We don't, I wrote a book about this. If you're really bored, you can read it. It's called The Land of Flickering Lights, Restoring American Democracy. One of the things I say in there is, I think when I tell people, kids in particular that come to see me in the Capitol, and I explain to them that the building was built by enslaved human beings, and that there are not enslaved human beings because of what Frederick Douglass and other people did. And then I describe Frederick Douglass. I won't do that today because I know I'm running out of time. What I tell them is,
I want you to tell these folks what to do, Michael. Tell them what to do.
In my mind, Frederick Douglass is as much a founder as the people that wrote the Constitution. And the women that fought, face far more disappointments than any disappointments we're facing right now to ensure that my daughters would all have the right to vote. They're founders, just like the people who wrote the Constitution. And in my mind, it turns out that's actually what our responsibility is as a citizen in a republic. You want to know what it is? It's that level, that elevated sense of responsibility that each of us has to this republic. And it won't exist. It won't persist unless we play our role to the fullest. So in your local community, you've got to find a way to be involved. Get involved through things like Bell, obviously voting. We talked about Lauren, but as hard as you think you're working, ask yourself about those suffragettes and the decades and decades and decades. It should not be this hard to make progress in a democracy, but unfortunately it is. It always is. So we should expect it to be hard. I suppose that's what I would say. Expect it to be hard. Don't be disappointed when it's hard. And accept that as work that in the end will build the nation's character and each other's character. And make this country more democratic, more fair, and more free. That's our job, and we can do it. I know we can.
Our privilege, in fact, is the opportunity in and of itself. As others make a way out of no way, we make the way for others.
That's totally right.
To have a way. Okay.
That's totally right.
Well, we are out of time.
10 seconds instead of 10 minutes.
Well, my father, at his gravesite, there's a low bench and a tree and a wall, and there's a bronze plaque, and it says that when one man or woman is poor, we are all poor. That's right. And I think if we were to take that to heart, is what you're saying, back to empathy. But these folks on this call have agency, have access to a plan. We now need to share that with others and with everyone in order to achieve the dream that you described. Thank you all so very much for joining us here today. Thank you, Senator Michael, for taking a little bit of time with me. You and I suspect, could have done hours. I have pages of questions, none of which I actually asked because other thoughts came up into my mind. But we look forward to continuing the conversation with you. To our viewers, if you have not taken a look at on their website, Bell Policy's most recent research, please, particularly proud of the focus on women who are on the front lines of our economy at the same time that we are experiencing the highest rate of impending evictions. So thank you, thank you, thank you for being with us here tonight. And I look forward to continuing the conversation in different ways, perhaps, but in different times over the course of the future. So
well, thank you, Lauren. Thanks for having me, everybody. I hope you'll stay safe. And I'm always trolling for every other people's good ideas. So Bell, keep them coming. We want them. And I think, you know, we're going to have a real opportunity to work together on a national level to deal with some of the issues you've already led us to confront in Colorado. So thanks.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, let me just thank the both of you. You both did exactly what I hoped you would do. Lauren, thank you for those amazing and probing questions. And Senator, I can't thank you enough for your for the thought that you bring to this conversation. My neck hurts from nodding in agreement. And you know, this notion of not giving up, there is a piece of wisdom from rabbinical literature that says, it is not our job to finish the work, and neither is it our job to cease its pursuit. And you know, I think for us, we don't stop. We got tons of ideas, and we look forward to working with you on solving these issues, both at the state level and the national level. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Happy anniversary to the Bell, and we look forward to continuing our partnership, Scott. We've got some work to do.